approximately 1,000 commentaries on mainstream news and precious metals websites around the world. And I am very happy and honored to have him back on the X22 Report Spotlight. Jeff, welcome back to the Spotlight.
Hi, Dave. It's always fun to have a chat.
Thank you for coming back here, and I really appreciate you taking the time out here. And I wanted to start off with our discussion last time. I think it was back in March. And we discussed the economy coming down maybe in the spring of this year. And we've made it through the spring. We're in the middle of almost the summer now. And I just wanted to get your take on what happened. Why didn't the economy crash during that period? Are you expecting it to crash at a different period now? Just let us know what has happened during this time period.
Well, it's funny. After we did the last clip, I looked at some of the comments from people who had listened to it, and I saw a couple of somewhat cynical replies to the, something along the lines of, oh, well, here's another person, making bold predictions, blah, blah, blah. And, to me, I thought that was a little bit unfair because from my perspective, I wasn't so much making a prediction when I was last here. I was simply relating a pattern to people. And the pattern that I saw, which in fact was pointed out to me by another analyst, was that over the last two bubble and crash cycles, they'd been approximately 8 years in length, and they'd been crashed leading up into the U.S. election cycle. So, my prediction, quote unquote, if you want to call it that, was that this is what would be most likely to happen this time around. And in fact, I was actually hoping that this pattern would hold, because the problem is that it should be obvious to your entire audience by now that these markets have been pumped up to such ridiculous levels that they're well overdue for a crash. So we know the crash is coming, and it's coming because, of course, it's been telegraphed. But the other side of it, from the point of view of the banking crime syndicate, is once you get the bubbles pumped up this high, there's no more profit in maintaining valuations at this level. There's no more chump money to be fleeced because there's no more chumps entering the market at these elevated valuations. They need to have a reset. They need to crash the markets back down again so they can start a new bubble and crash cycle. So, there's no doubt that the crash is coming. It would have been better for us if it would have happened in the time frame that I'd specified, in the time frame we'd seen previously, because that would have indicated a similar economic-based bubble and crash script. The fact that we've not seen the markets crashed and we've not seen an economic trigger used to detonate them has me extremely concerned, because if we're not going to see an economic trigger used to detonate these markets, then that means we're going to see something worse. And of course, the most likely possibility is that there will be a large war that will be staged, or perhaps some quote-unquote terrorist attack of tremendous scale that will be used as the pretext to crash the markets. And so, I'm disappointed, not for so much for myself that we haven't seen these markets crashed already. I'm disappointed for all of us because it bodes ill for the future.
So you're saying that the powers that be, the central bankers, they're waiting to set everything up to actually bring down the economy.
Yeah, and you see, the point here is that the reason why the spring prior to the U.S. election is the ideal time to stage such a crash is because they can play their Tweedledee Tweedledum game. They point to the outgoing regime in the U.S. 8-year election cycle and blame them as the supposed scapegoats for the crash, and then they hail the incoming party as the white knights that are going to save everybody. And of course, the American voter has by now completely forgotten that the supposed white knights that are going to come in to rescue them are the same clowns they were blaming for the crash previous to that. So, these stooges, they all serve the bankers. It doesn't matter whether we're talking Republicans or Democrats. These are just bought and paid for puppets. And so the whole point is they don't mind scapegoating the puppets. They never want the focus to be on themselves, on the big bank crime syndicate that is actually in control of these markets. And so we know there has to be a diversion used to stage the crash so that the blame is not focused upon the correct source, the bankers. And like I say, if they can't scapegoat the politicians in an efficient manner, they don't want to scapegoat the incoming regime. They don't want the crash to occur in November or January, and then the subsequent carnage to take place just as the new regime's coming to power, because that essentially discredits their new servants, and that serves no purpose for them. So if we're not going to see a domestic scapegoat used as the to blame on this next bubble, it's going to be some exogenous event. And like I say, the most likely exogenous events will be that the bankers staging another massive war, or staging another phony terrorist, quote unquote terrorist attack, and using that as the pretend cause for the crash that they're going to stage.
Now, do you think that there could be some type of black swan? Because we see the central bankers, they're putting out fires left and right. I mean, we have the European banking system, which is a disaster. The Italian banks needed a bailout. The rest of the European banks, like Deutsche Bank and the rest, they're in trouble. When you look at the European banks, how do you see them? Do you feel that they're ready to implode, or do you feel that they're okay and they'll make it through?
Well, it really depends upon your perspective here. And, for any of your listeners that have followed my own work, I have two very firm opinions about the actual control paradigm in our system. And the first of these is that there's only one bank. Mm-hmm. And, I've written about this extensively. This is not, mere fantasy that I've conjured up. This is based upon massive computer modeling that was done by 3 Swiss researchers. They examined 10 million corporate and independent actors in the global economy and did extensive computer modeling, and their findings were that there was, quote unquote, a single super entity that controlled basically all of the financial system around the world and 40% of the entire global economy. So, I naturally dubbed this super entity the one bank because it's a financial super entity, and the point is this super entity controls all of the big banks. So the idea that the Italian banks are weak, or the German banks are weak, I mean, it's like pointing at a person and saying, well, that person's right arm is weak, that person's left arm is weak. Well, it's rather trivial. Nobody dies because they have a weak arm. And so you see that this takes us right back to before the crash of '08, when Lehman Brothers was deliberately sacrificed. We were presented with this fraudulent paradigm of too big to fail. Oh, well, you have to shower us with all of these hundreds of billions of dollars, and of course the actual amount ended up being in the tens of trillions. You have to shower us with all of this free money because the domino effect of the Lehman Brothers crash is going to take us all down. Well, the Lehman Brothers was just one tentacle of this crime syndicate. And the idea was that we were supposed to be shoveling all sorts of money into the right hand of this crime syndicate to pay for the losses it was suffering with its left hand. It was all contrived. It was all fraudulent. There was never any need for a bailout. But I mean, we're even way beyond this. Then, of course, we have this interest rate regime brought in the U.S., 0% interest rate. Of course, that's a sham transaction. What a 0% interest rate is free money. So we have this, first we have the too big to fail blackmail, then we have the Federal Reserve bringing in its free money regime. And what people have to understand is when you seed the banks with trillions of dollars of free money in a fractional reserve system, this provides them with the opportunity to literally counterfeit infinite quantities of free money leveraged upon the original 3 trillions they received. So this crime syndicate has been able to counterfeit, literally, if it wanted to, quadrillions of dollars. Quadrillions, not trillions, not hundreds of trillions, quadrillions of dollars. And so, we're now told, oh, well, the banks are in danger of failing. Well, how can they be in danger of failing when they have enough funny money under their control to purchase everything in the world 10 times over?
So when we look at this, you're saying that right now the banks, they'll be continually propped up. We don't have to, from either the ECB, from the Fed, from that single super entity that controls all the big banks.
Well, they won't necessarily all be propped up. See, here Here's the other thing that happened when we go back to the previous crash cycle.
Hmm.
Of course, we had Lehman Brothers sacrificed. We
Right.
had several other big banks sacrificed. Well, what was the effect of that? All of the assets that were owned by these other big banks, which of course were all just tentacles of the one bank, were taken over by the surviving tentacles. So a few of the tentacles get pruned, all of the remaining tentacles get bigger. And so it becomes an even worse crime syndicate because instead of its control being spread amongst, say, 70 different banks, after the dust settled after the last crash, there would have been 50, 55. And of course, what we'll see in this next cycle is we'll see a few more tentacles deliberately sacrificed again. That's part of the theater. They need this to perpetuate their too big to fail blackmail. If nobody went out of business, they couldn't make the blackmail seem real enough. It's like with the phony terrorism. They have to now sacrifice some people. They have to slaughter innocent people to make this phony war seem real. They've got to kill a few banks to make the whole too big to fail blackmail seem real. They're all tentacles of a single crime syndicate. The crime syndicate has so much funny money it could never go under, but we'll still see this theater because it's useful for them. It allows further consolidation. It allows them to do their blackmail game. And of course, there's no more money for bailouts. Now we're going to see bail-ins where the bankers simply point to private assets and say, I want to steal this, I want to steal that. And our governments have already all indicated that they will rubber stamp this crime.
Now, when we talk about all of this, we then have the Brexit, where actually nothing actually really happened. The UK did not leave the EU right now. It was in a referendum. It was an advisory referendum. They have never enacted Article 50 right now. Certain things have happened. What do you make of the Brexit? One, is the UK going to actually leave, or was this complete theater for something else?
Well, here I have to confess that I was sucked in like a lot of people originally. And, I jumped right on the Brexit is important bandwagon, and actually wrote a commentary predicting that the Brexit vote would be rigged. Because of course what we were looking at is not simply the possibility of the UK leaving the European Union, but we know that there's a large and growing discontent among other EU members. And one of the most notable examples is France. And currently the leading politician in France's next presidential race is Marine Le Pen from Le Front National. And she has dubbed herself Madame Frexit. So, the point is, if the UK left the EU, it would not have been a fatal blow because the UK was never fully in. It was kind of half in, half out, and it would have been damaging, but not fatal. But the problem is that if the UK ever leaves the EU, it will almost certainly trigger a flood of other defections, and that's, of course, what the bankers can't tolerate. So, of course, I assumed that they would simply rig the vote. And we've seen, rigged elections becoming a regular event. Up here in Canada, in my province of British Columbia, the last election was rigged. All of the polls predicted that the opposition party was going to sweep in with a majority victory, and we had the incumbent establishment party not simply manage to hang on, but increase their own majority. And then in Canada's national election, we had the polls all predicting a tight three-way race. And nobody could call who was going to win. And what we saw instead was one party come out, one establishment party come out, and win a massive election majority that was beyond anything deemed possible in any of the pre-election polling. And even in the UK's last national election, same thing. The Cameron government was supposed to be defeated and thrown out of power. Not only did they hang on, but they increased their majority. So, we see these elections, which are obviously fraudulent, because polling has become almost an exact science. And this was the reason, going back 10, 15 years ago, we were seeing elections being called by media earlier and earlier on election night, because the polling agencies, pre-election polling and exit polls, were so accurate that they were able to rely upon that and the early results, and then deem elections as being won or lost. Now, of course, we're suddenly seeing all of these anomalous results, and not just mild anomalies, but utterly outrageous anomalies that could not possibly be the result of legitimate voting patterns. And so, like I say, I thought the Brexit vote was just going to be another rigged election, and then of course we see the Leave vote, win, and then as you point out, nothing's actually changed except that the Leave vote has been wonderfully convenient for the establishment. Oh, gee, the British have voted for Brexit. I guess the Federal Reserve can't raise interest rates no matter how much they really want to. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. It's just so silly. And I mean, I chide myself now for not being a little bit more sophisticated and looking past the vote to how the oligarchs and the establishment might use a pro-Leave vote for their own scripts.
Actually, when you think about this, they kind of did fix this in a certain way. They just let it happen so they could, because the central bankers, they like to manipulate and use things to their advantage. And I think they saw that, listen, this would be good for us. Let this happen right now. Even though they're not leaving the EU, we can use it to let air out of the bubble. We can do some bailouts. The Fed doesn't have to raise interest rates, like you said, and we can blame why things are turning down on the people of the UK. I mean, that's pretty much what we saw.
And in fact, I was even musing at one point whether this Leave the EU vote was going to be used as the trigger for the next crash, because that would have been an exogenous event that, of course, would have left the US political parties unscathed as far as being the quote-unquote cause of the crash. So yeah, this was the whole thing. There was actually a lot more utility in a Leave vote than in a Remain vote. And, I was just one of the many people who didn't perceive that prior to the actual voting itself.
Now, I wanted to turn to the U.S. right now because we're seeing the stock market, it's rallying. I mean, it's just continually moving up. I mean, after the Brexit, we saw it come down and they blamed everything on what happened in the UK. But now all of a sudden, we see things turn around. The market's heading up. I mean, corporate defaults are rising. Corporate earnings are going down. Retail sales are continually declining. We've seen gold. I remember two interviews back when the first time I interviewed you, gold was around 1,000 or so an ounce, and now we're at 13 and change, and we're continually seeing gold move up. What's your take on what is happening right now with gold? Do you think gold is going to continually move up, or do you think gold and silver, that's it, we've had the run, now it's over, and we're back to the central bankers suppressing gold and silver once again, and that's it?
Well, here I'm going to take credit for being correct with my level of cynicism. And, right from the beginning of this rise in precious metals prices, I've been very outspoken in dubbing this a fake rally. And of course, once again, it gets back to the whole big picture. We know there is a crash coming up. Mm-hmm. We know that the bankers, of course, have this massive hatred of precious metals because gold and silver are the economic canaries in the coal mine that are supposed to warn us of political uncertainty. They're supposed to warn us of economic uncertainty. And they're supposed to warn us when the bankers are going nuts with monetary policy and debasing our currencies. So suppressing precious metals prices is always of utmost importance to the banking crime syndicate, because if you kill the canary in the coal mine, the canary can't sing. So the point is, we've got a crash coming up here. We already had precious metals prices at rock bottom level before the crash. So the problem for the banking crime syndicate was if they staged the next crash with precious metals already crashed, they couldn't take them down hard along with everything else. And so relatively speaking, they would stand out as a safe haven compared to other asset classes. This is intolerable. It's of paramount importance for the banking crime syndicate that precious metals prices be going down hard with everything else. So in a perverse manner, they decided to take precious metals prices up, to march them up a modest amount so that they would be high enough to crash. And that is what we have seen over the past 6 months, is a fake rally to bring precious metals prices up to a level where the bankers are capable of taking them down hard again. And, we saw an example of this in today's news. Of course, over the weekend, I'm sure you heard about the failed coup attempt in
Yes.
failed
Yeah.
coup attempt in Turkey.
Yes.
Let me see if I can do a better job of talking here. Okay, so and then of course we see that precious metals prices are actually lower today. And the ridiculous propaganda from the mainstream media is that, oh yeah, gold prices are lower because the coup failed. And I mean, this is total perversion. If we were in a legitimate world with legitimate markets and we were having a legitimate rally in precious metals, prices would have gone up because the coup was attempted. This is the point. A coup was attempted in a large nation, a large and strategically important nation. Turkey has tremendous geopolitical strategic importance, and a coup was attempted in this nation. That should have sent prices shooting up higher. But instead, we get this absurd propaganda that, oh yeah, the prices are lower because the coup failed. Well, the prices should have gone up significantly just because the coup was attempted. They should have gone, of course, skyrocketing higher if the coup succeeded. But this is a perfect example of the perversion that we have with this fake rally. And I mean, another example is with the Fed. If we were having legitimate markets and a legitimate rally in the precious metals sector, every time the Fed failed to raise interest rates, we would see the market shoot up higher again. Well, that's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing instead is that the markets do practically nothing when they once again break their promise to raise interest rates, but the prices get pushed lower when they talk about raising rates some more. And I mean, so this is more perversion. In a legitimate world, markets are driven by actions, not talk. And especially they're not driven by the talk of liars, that have been promising to raise interest rates, to normalize interest rates for 8 years and have done nothing. So, I mean, this is another example of this utter perversion of this paradigm. If we had a legitimate market, the precious metals prices would have been rocketing higher past their previous highs because there's been nothing done by the Fed to raise interest rates. There's been nothing done to commence its exit strategy. Do you remember that phrase, exit strategy? You remember how we used to hear it all the time in 2009 and 2010? Yes, the Fed has an exit strategy. Well, where is it? And so, I mean, this is the point. There never was an exit strategy, but instead of precious metals reacting to that by going higher and higher and higher, we've seen the prices grind lower and lower and lower. It's utter perversion of anything remotely resembling legitimate markets.
No, and I agree. I mean, right now I think I've seen the Fed saying that they most likely will not raise interest rates until 2018 now. I mean, that was the last thing I heard. I think this was today. Actually, I heard something about that, which I don't think they were ever going to raise the rates. And they're, going forward, I think they're using everything they possibly can to explain away why they're not going to raise rates. And I think eventually what they're going to have to do is maybe go into negative interest rates because, yes, they can manipulate the stock market, they can suppress gold, but it's very difficult to manipulate what the people do in the country, like purchasing retail, going out and purchasing a home. These things are very hard to manipulate. It's very difficult to say that, retail is doing well when a lot of stores are closing. They can manipulate unemployment, but when a lot of people are not working, it's hard to explain away. And I think many people now, even those people that don't follow alternative media or anything like that, they're starting to realize that the unemployment rate really doesn't make any sense anymore. And we see right now that the Fed, they're kind of stuck right now in what they can do. I mean, they can create currency out of thin air. They can keep QE going. They can keep the banks going. But they can't do anything to make the people go out and spend their money. And
well,
go ahead.
Well, here I'm going to disagree somewhat.
Okay.
And point out that when you say, well, they can't fake some things, this is definitely correct. But the problem is that in any particular facet of the economy you look where there is a particular stat that can't be faked, right beside that is another stat that can be faked, and they fake that one. So, for instance, in the labor market, they can't fake the civilian participation rate. So they can't fake the fact that there's actually 3 million less Americans working today than the number that was working when the supposed recovery began. There's been 3 million lost jobs during this quote-unquote recovery, while the Obama regime has pretended to create more than 11 million new jobs. I mean, that's a
Right.
14 million job lie. So that, in the fantasy world of the BLS and its monthly jobs reports, there's been 11 million new jobs created. In the real world, there's been 3 million more jobs lost in the U.S., and yet most people believe the lie. We go to the realm of the U.S.'s consumer economy. And yes, like you say, you can't really fake retail sales. Well, actually, of course, you can, because retail sales should be discounted by the rate of inflation. If you don't discount retail sales by the rate of inflation, then you're incorporating price increases into what you're calling sales. You
Mhm.
know, what's of significance is not the amount of dollars that are spent, but the amount of goods that are actually sold. So if you don't discount for inflation, that's falsifying retail sales right there. So that's one falsification. But even, like you say, they can't totally falsify that number. The number they can falsify is the consumer spending statistic. So we see this utterly, again, more incredible perversion like in the labor market, where you see retail sales numbers being incredibly anemic month after month after month. But you look at the consumer spending numbers and they're robust. Oh yeah, upward, without exception. So I mean, this again, it's more utter perversion. Consumer spending is strong, but retail sales are weak.
Right.
There's been 11 million new jobs created, but there's 3 million less Americans working. So I mean, this is the utter perversion we're seeing between reality and the phony statistics. And the problem is of course, because the banking crime syndicate also controls the media oligopoly, it's the phony stats that are screamed from the rooftops, and reality is just, whispered occasionally. And so, it doesn't matter that the truth is out there if the propaganda machine whispers the truth and screams the lies. And of course, it whispers the truth once, but it screams the lies 100 times.
That is absolutely true. Let me ask you, do you think the Fed is going to use the nuclear option of helicopter money? Because we see Bernanke, he was out in Japan with Abe and Kuroda talking about doing some type of pilot program, implementing helicopter money. Do you think eventually what's going to happen is they're going to say, okay, we're just going to have to, give the money to the people, and hopefully this can keep the system going a little bit longer?
Well, two things. First of all, we already saw the Bernanke helicopter drop. I mean, that was what took place after the crash of '08. I don't know if your listeners read through many of my commentaries, but I have regularly posted a chart of the U.S.'s adjusted monetary base during the period of the Bernanke helicopter drop. And I mean, it couldn't be more obvious. In a legitimate system, what we see is the way the U.S. monetary base used to look. It basically a horizontal line with only the very slightest upward slope. And then, of course, we have the crash of '08. And, of course, prior to that, the slope was slowly increasing. But then we have the crash of '08, and we have the Bernanke helicopter drop start, and we go from a horizontal line to literally a vertical line, straight up. And as I've explained to people both in interviews and in numerous commentaries, we have a term for when a nation's monetary base goes straight up. It's called hyperinflation. What anybody who looked at a chart of the U.S. monetary base from 2009 through to 2014 saw a vertical line, the mathematical representation of hyperinflation. And there's only two reasons why the US dollar has not already crashed to zero. First of all, the vast majority of this new funny money that's been conjured into existence has been sequestered from the general economy. It's flowed into the derivatives market. This is a private casino run by the bankers and the oligarchs. It's a closed system. They have entire control of it. It's an unregulated market, but of course they call it a self-regulated market. The criminals, run every aspect of it, and so we have, more than 1 quadrillion of their funny money floating around in the derivatives market. More than 20 times the size of global GDP. So we have this vast pool of this conjured worthless counterfeit funny money that is sequestered outside of the global economy. If even a significant portion of it had ever flowed into the broader economy, we would have seen at least an inflation spiral, if not a hyperinflation spiral. And the other reason we haven't seen the US dollar go to zero is because the banking crime syndicate literally manipulates all of the world's currencies all of the time. And again, this is not an opinion. This is not a theory. This is me simply looking and saying, look at that conviction. The big banks were convicted of rigging all of the world's currencies going back to at least 2008. Is that a familiar number? 2008, the year they began to drive the US dollar to zero in earnest. So, this is not conspiracy theory. This is conspiracy fact. All of the big banks have been convicted of manipulating all of the world's currencies going back to 2008. They have complete control of these markets, and as I've explained previously, they control these markets now not via their more cruder means of manipulation, but via computerized trading algorithms. What the bankers and the clowns in the media call quote-unquote HFT trading is nothing more than a permanent computerized price rigging operation. Our markets are completely dominated by these computerized trading algorithms, virtually every market. And when I say dominated, we're talking generally at least 75% of all the trading in virtually all markets is computerized algorithm trading. So if 75% of the trading is algorithm trading, the algorithms run the markets. And anybody who has a sophisticated understanding of mathematics would understand how easy it is to use these algorithms to manipulate markets. If you control the data, and of course we've already talked about how they control the data, then you can control the output, you can control the prices, because that's all an algorithm is. It takes data and it processes it and it produces a result. They supply the algorithms with their phony stats and they produce their phony prices with it. And it's almost omnipotent system of control at this point.
Where do you see the economy going at this point? The president, the Fed, the Fed just came out with their beige book telling us that the economy seems like it's doing well, it's getting stronger. Where do you see the economy going from this point on?
Well, once again, let's go back to the real world. And as we've been discussing throughout this clip, of course, there was never any U.S. recovery. The U.S. economy has just continued going down and down and down. More and more jobs being lost. The financial system getting sicker and sicker. The U.S. dollar being debased to worthlessness. There's never been any interruption in the downward spiral. All that's been changed is they've manufactured increasingly fraudulent statistics to make it look like there was a turnaround when, of course, nothing has ever changed at all. So, here, of course, again, it's not a matter of predicting. We have this trend, and the trend is relentlessly down, and there's nothing at all can reverse this trend while our nations are buried in debt. If we had a debt jubilee event and all of these fraudulent bond debts were wiped clean, then we could see a real turnaround in our economies because they wouldn't have this massive millstone around their neck where 20% or 25% of every revenue dollar that comes into our governments goes out the door as interest payments to a crime syndicate. So, no economy can be healthy when 1/4 of everything you take in is going out as extortion payments to a crime syndicate. So, this is the whole point. There can never be anything resembling health in our economies while these millstones of debt hang around the throats of our governments. There can never be anything remotely resembling health in our economies when we're using these utterly worthless, totally debauched currencies, which they continue to inflate in an extreme reckless manner all the time. I mean, they talk about, we're going to resume QE again. Well, of course, they never stop increasing their supply of funny money. They just stop announcing it. And so, as I pointed out before, with 0% interest rates and fractional reserve banking, the banking crime syndicate can simply conjure quadrillions of dollars. And there's no more QE has to be announced. They just simply lend this free money back and forth between each other. This is the thing with 0% interest rates. One bank gets $1 trillion of Fed money for free. At 35-to-1 ratio of our fractional reserve banking system, it can lend out $35 trillion for free. And then it lends it out to another one of these big bank tentacles who receives the $35 trillion for free, and then it can lend out 35 times that $35 trillion for free. That's right now we're at $2 quadrillion. So, that's just two banks engaging in this combination fraud of 0% interest rates and fractional reserve banking. And of course, fractional reserve banking is inherent fraud. I mean, our monetary system is a system that is a Ponzi scheme because it can only survive when you continually infuse it with newly conjured money, it is an entirely fraudulent system. And so you can't, and we've had this fraudulent system now for close to 50 years, since the last vestige of the gold standard was eliminated. So you can never recover when you have a system that's entirely fraudulent and continues to get more fraudulent by the day. So one prediction I can make with certainty is that we will never see anything get better ever in our economies until this system blows up completely. We will continue going down and down and down, either unofficially while they continue lying about things, or officially when they stage the next crash. And so, it doesn't matter what they're saying, whether they're saying things are recovering or they're saying things are crashing, we're still crashing and crashing and crashing, and nothing can alter this until it blows apart completely.
Jeff, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work?
My site is bullionbullscanada.com, and I've been operating that site now for a little over 7.5 years. And I'm also really excited to be a contributing writer to Sprott Money, which is a financial investment company up in Canada, and one of the few financial companies that is out there trying to get the truth out to people. And I feel really privileged to have a working relationship with them.
Well, Jeff, thank you very much for coming on the X22 Report Spotlight. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.